Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Dalid, and we're going to begin 3 lines down from the top. And the Gemara is now going to praise what we call tzimtzum hotzos, meaning not to spend too much money for food. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishmei Rabbi Yehuda bar Eloi, echol batzal v'shev batzel. Now, let's go backwards. Shev batzel means sit in the sun, in the shade, meaning you have a roof over your head. And if you'll spend your money on less expensive food like onions and other vegetables, and you don't exaggerate your spending on food, then you'll be able to remain in your house. No one's going to come and claim that you owe them money and confiscate your house. But velotechol ivazin v'tarnagolin. But if you get hooked on eating roast duck and expensive meat, then yehe libcha rodef alecha, you'll get addicted to that very outstanding menu of expensive meat. And if you won't be able to afford that meat, you're going to sell the house over your head in order to purchase. This is what we call addiction. Unfortunately, we have drug addiction, we have intoxication of wine. We spoke before on the previous Amud about those who know how to control their drinking. And if he's not disciplined in the way he eats, he's going to be spending an exceptional amount of money on acquiring these expensive foods. And therefore, pchos, meaning reduce the level of your eating and drinking, and then tosif al diroscha. On the contrary, you'll be able to even add something, like you wanted to build a roof on your apartment, on your flat. You'll be able to do so. Here he says in the comment, al yedeshem akametz, he's a little bit stingy about macholo. Yochel l'sheves betzel beso l'archivo. He doesn't have to sell his house. He can even expand his house. Tosif al diroso, tosef aliyah, and he'll be able to expand his house. It's really true. There's a book, I forgot the name of it, about coffee. You know how much people spend on coffee, especially in the United States. You know, coffee is a whole thing. So, you know, you're working in gifts, you go to this coffee shop, that coffee shop. They made a calculation that if you would cut out 1 or 2 coffees a day over the course of 30, 40 years, you'll amass a major wealth. Little small monies accumulate. Ki asa ula came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel. Omarni declared, Masla maslin b'marav. Let me give you a mashal. And the word masla means to be mochel and mashal about Eretz Yisrael. The achel al yasa, those who eat an aliyah is the most expensive part of the meat. Tashi bi'ilisa. At the end, he's going to have to hide. What does it mean, hide? He eats such expensive meat that it's going to eat up all his money. It's consume all his assets. He's going to be spending so much money on this aliyah, on this high quality meat. And now his debtors are coming to collect. You know, he ordered this meat. He hasn't paid up. He bought on credit. And he's going to have to hide because he has no money to pay it back. But on the contrary, the ochil kakule, and here he's got to play on words. Kakule in Aramaic is yerakos, so he eats more basic food, not spending a lot of money. And then he has the word ikile demasi shachit. Now the word ikile, which is very similar to the word kakule in Aramaic, means a place in the back of the city where the poor people hang out, like the butchers and so forth and so on. And otherwise it's called Ashpos Ha'ir. It's like the dumping grounds of the city. Rashi in Tehillim on the pasuk Me Ashpos Yorim Evyon, he mentions that the Targum says Mekalkalasa. So Me Ashpos is Mekalkalasa. In other words, he's going to sit in a place where, the rank and file people sit, and no one's going to bother him. No one's going to come and claim you owe me funds. Okay, this leads us to the Mishnah that is going to deal with the Seder on Leila Pesach, and specifically with the parts of the Seder that come before the meal. And first, we're going to talk about the first of the four kosas of Yayin, which is the kos of Kiddush. And the Mishnah is going to present a machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai about the sequence, the correct sequence of brachos for Kiddush. And this is true not only for Leil Pesach, this is true for Leil Yontif. Should he recite Bar Pri Hagafen first on the Yayin and then Mekadesh Yisrael Vazmanim, or the other way around? And here's the machlokas Tanon. Mazgulo Kos Rishon. They poured for the Mekadesh, he who's going to recite Kiddush, the first of the 4 cups of wine. Beit Shammai Omrim, first, Mevarech al Hayom. You should say Baruch Atah Hashem, Mekadesh Yisrael Vazman. V'achakach then Mevarech al Yayin. And the Gemara is going to explain why Beit Shammai insists on that sequence. Ubeis Hillel Omrim, on the contrary, Mevarech al Yayin. This is familiar to us, our minhag. He recites Bar Pri Hagafen, v'achakach Mevarech al Yom. Then he recites Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazman. Ton Rabbanan. The Bryce is going to explain the reasons for Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai as recorded in the Machlokas in the Mishnah. Dvarim shebein Beit Shammai u Beis Hillel b'Seuda. We are going to talk about the Machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai with regard to Seuda. And this is based on the Gemara in Brachos on Daf Nun Aleph. The Gemara there has a whole list of debates between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai with regard to Seuda. Here, we're going to only focus on that machlokas which is mentioned in our Mishnah. Beit Shammai Omrim regarding Kiddush on Shabbos. Leil Shabbos, Leil Yontif, Mevarech al Hayom. First he recites the bracha of Kiddush Hayom, v'achach then Mevarech al Yayin Bar Pri Hagafen. Why? Why is he drinking wine? The machayev of wine is because of Kiddush. So let's begin with Kiddush. That's the basic fundamental obligation. And that obligation will engender a mitzvah of Kiddush al Yayin. So make the Bar Pri Hagafen afterwards. His basic chova, his fundamental obligation is Kiddush, not drinking wine. To drink wine before the Suda? I mean, what's that all about? So therefore it makes sense, minadin, that first he should be makdim the bracha of Kiddush, and then Birchas Hayayin. Furthermore, Beit Shammai gives a second reason to support their ruling, and that is Kvar Kiddush Hayom Vadayin Yayin Lo Ba. It already became night. It's Tzeisa Kochavim. There's Kiddusha Hayom, and he doesn't bring the yayin, so to speak, out to the shulchan. Meaning, at this point, he is obligated in Kiddush. Tzeisa Kochavim doesn't generate an obligation for him to recite a Bar Pri Hagafen, take wine out to the table. It generates a chiyuv of Kiddush. Now, again, you're allowed to be Mekadesh on a kos even before Tzeisa Kochavim, and even before this Kedushas Hayom. But nevertheless, the Rashba there in the Sugya Bracha says that Amakadish Rabod Yom Chalav Isam Malach B'Shashim Omer Kiddush. The very moment he recites Kiddush, he is asur because Kiddush itself is tantamount to Kabbalah's Tosefes Shabbos. So even though it's Mibod Yom, it's not yet nightfall. Nevertheless, there is Kiddush Hayom. He has accepted upon himself Kiddush Hayom. So Kiddush comes first. Yayin comes second. And therefore, the din is, says Beit Shammai, that first he should, just like Kiddush Hayom comes first before the Yayin, in the beginning of Shabbos or Yom, so too, sequentially, he should start with the bracha of Kiddush and then go on to the bracha Yayin. Beis Hillel Omrim, on the other hand, Mevarach Yayin v'akav mipnei shayayin gorem l'Kiddush Omer. A fascinating new perspective of Beis Hillel. In a sense, Beis Hillel is the revolutionary here. And he says that if he didn't have wine, he would not be able to make Kiddush, because the halacha is that Kiddush has to be recited on wine. Again, even though Zochar Es Yom Shabbos L'Kadsho generates an independent chiyuv Kiddush that's independent of Yayin, but that he was Mekayim in Tefillah. Now Chazal established the second Kiddush that's connected to the Suda, al hayayin. If he doesn't have yayin to establish the Suda or pas, then he will not recite Kiddush. He was yotze with the Kiddush and davening, but not this separate independent fee of Kiddush that's brought about by the yayin, by the Suda. And therefore, since there would not be any Kiddush without yayin, it makes sense that he should first and foremost make the bracha on the Kiddush, on the yayin, and then on the Kiddush against Beis Shammai. Another explanation of Beis Hillel. We have a principle called Tadir. And yayin is a bracha that we recite the whole week long. Birchas Hayom Eina Tadira. We only recite Birchas Kiddush Hayom on Shabbos and Yom Tov, on rare occasions, relatively rare, again, once a week, but not on a daily basis. So therefore, Tadir Kodim, we should make the bracha first on the yayin. And the Rashbam here, it's a super commentary here on Perek Arvei Pesachim. He quotes a Sugin Zvachim on Daf Peites that quotes the source for this halacha of Tadir Kodem. And it's derived from Pasuk in Parshas Pinchas. It says, Milvada los haboker ashelo lasat tamid teoses ela. And from the extra words, asher liolas hatamid, we derive that the reason why the Olas HaBoker comes before the Musaf is because Karban Tamid is Tadir. The Gemara paskins v'hilchasa k'divrei Beis Hillel. We paskin like Beis Hillel. The Gemara asks the question, "My davaracha, why did Beis Hillel feel compelled to quote a second reason of Tadir? Why wasn't he satisfied and complacent with his first reason that it's only because he has Yayin that he can recite Kiddush?" If you'll argue against my first reasoning for being makdim yayin chasam tarti hachachada, this is the following: if you compare birchas hayom to birchas yayin, you might say it's 2 against 1, meaning there are 2 reasons that kick in favor of being mocked in Birchas Hayom, and only 1 reason in Birchas Hayayin in Bar Pri Hagafen. And therefore, Beis Hillel wants to add another reason for starting with Yayin, and that is Hachinami Tarti Ninu, that Yayin also has 2 reasons. And the second reason that we have is Tadir V'Cheinu Tadir Kodem. So he says the following, that one could have argued that as far as Birkas Hayom, there are 2 reasons to be mocked in it. First of all, because as Beit Shammai mentioned earlier, it's already Kiddush Hayom, and you're obligated in Kiddush, meaning with Tzeis HaKochavim, that's your primary obligation. And secondly, the only reason you're drinking the wine is because of the Kiddush. There's no independent mitzvah of drinking wine. The wine is meant just to set up the Kiddush, so the Kiddush really generates the wine. On the other hand, Yayin should come first because in the absence of Yayin, there's no Kiddush. I need to balance it by adding another reasoning. It's not enough to have just Beis Hillel's first reason that without the Yayin, there's no Kiddush. I need a second reason which will calculate or strengthen in favor of Yayin first, and that is Tadir V'Cheinu Tadir. The Gemara says, Halacha k'divrei Beis Hillel. Why did you have to paskin like Beis Hillel? Pshita, a nafik baskol. We have a baskol that says that halacha is always k'Beis Hillel, and that's the Gemara in Eruvin on Daf Yud Gimel. Why did the Brisa have to feel compelled to tell me here that we paskin like Beis Hillel? We always paskin like Beis Hillel against Beis Shammai. And the Gemara says the following. I'm going to give you 2 answers. If you want, you could say the following. This Brisa historically came before the Baskol, at a time period in which we would decide in every case unto itself whether we pass like Beis Hillel or like Beit Shammai. And if you want, I could give you another answer. Even though after there was a Baskol, we always paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, we always paskin like Beis Hillel against Beit Shammai. But nevertheless, this Brisa is Rabbi Yeshua, the Omar, ein mashgichim bebaskol. And this is a Gemara, a very famous Gemara of Tanur Shalach Noi in Bamitzia Nuntes, where there was a baskol that came out in favor of Rabbi Eliezer against Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, ein mashgichim bebaskol. Lo b'shamayim, we don't paskin based on a baskol. This leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Kuf Yud Daled Amud Aleph. The Mishnah continues to explain the laws of Leil HaSeder, and we finish with Kiddush. That's Kos Rishon. Now we're ready for Mezigas Kos Sheni. After Kiddush, Heviu Lefanov. After he drank the first cup of wine, they bring him Yerokos. And this is all in order to stimulate the curiosity of the children. They'll see something is very odd. We're bringing out vegetables we haven't even washed yet. We haven't started our meal yet. And this will give them the impetus to ask the question, Manish Tana, because we don't usually eat Yerokos before the Suda. So let's just say a few words about the mitzvah of the Gadat Bincha of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. The mitzvah should be fulfilled b'derech she'ela u'tshuva. We do everything we can on the night of the Seder to stimulate the curiosity, arouse the curiosity of the children so they will ask questions. And the Rosh writes that ein mitzvah l'saper b'piv v'sipur tisvei b'leil HaSeder. The entire mitzvah is contingent on she'elas haben. And according to the Rosh Shita, if the child doesn't come along and ask the question, there's no mitzvah of sipur. And therefore, the Gemara is going to put so much emphasis on what we call shinui, to do changes that have the purpose and hopefully will arouse the curiosity of the children so they'll come forward to ask the question, and then we can fulfill the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. However, the Gemara is going to say later on in Daf Kuf Zayin that Gam in lo ben, if he doesn't have a son to ask him, there still is a mitzvah of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim. And who shoel is atzmo? He asks himself. What's that all about? According to the Rosh, unless the child asks the question, there's no mitzvah. So what do you mean you ask yourself? What's that all about? And it's unbelievable. The Chidah, who lived about 2.5 centuries ago, he writes, Mishum Chibur Mitzvah. This is just Chibur Mitzvah, to ask himself. There's no mitzvah whatsoever when he asks himself the question. It's not even a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. Others say that according to the Rosh, on a Doraisa level, you need it contingent on the son asking the question. But if he doesn't have a ben, at least he's got a chiyuv d'Rabbanan of Sipur Yitzis Mitzrayim, and he has to ask himself the question. He has to teach his son, even if his son doesn't ask. Here's a quote from Reb Chaim Brisker. Every year on the night of the Pesach, there are 3 differences between the mitzvah of Zechiras Yitzias Mitzrayim, which is a mitzvah that applies every day of the year, and the mitzvah of Sipur Yitzias Mitzrayim. Number 1, Sipur is got to be derech shelu tshuva, question answer zechira, just remember Yitzias Mitzrayim. Secondly, Sipur is to tell the entire shtalshlus of Maisa, and zechira is only zechira bi'alma. Just say the word zech Yitzias Mitzrayim, and then you'll see the whole year round. And thirdly, the mitzvah of Sipur includes taimei mitzvahs, like Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Gamliel says, al shlosha kol shalom or shlosha dvarim. Lo Yotzei Chavasa, which is going to come up later on in the Masechet. Okay. So now they bring out a yerek. Now, of course, a vegetable is not morah. And he takes that vegetable, whatever your minig is, and he dips it into chometz, into vinegar, or to mei melach, or to Salzwasser. And now the question is, what if he doesn't have any other vegetable? It's a very strange. The only vegetable he has is chazeres, which is one min of the many different minim of mara. So mitabel bechazeres, he eats the chazeres after he dips it into charoses. Achemagila parperes hapas. In other words, it's before he eats the matzah, because he's bringing out the yerek right after Kos Rishon. And for sure, he hasn't recited the bracha al achilas moror, because that bracha comes after al achilas matzah. So in other words, the mitzvah is al matzos umarorim yochlu, that he should eat matzahs first and moror second. So he's in a very strange situation. If the only vegetable he has is chazeres, which he's going to eat after he dips it into charoses, and in this case, he has no choice, it seems, but he's going to switch around the order, and he's going to be eating moror before matzah. The Mishnah continues. It says, "Heviu lefon of matzah v'chazeres." Oh, now they brought him the matzah and they brought chazeres for the mitzvah moror, and now he should be reciting the Haggadah. And while he recites the Haggadah, he should mention that, look, there's matzah, there's moror. He recites the Haggadah, b'shosh yesh matzah moror mumrachim lefona. And then v'charoses, they bring the charoses out, a mixture of different kinds of fruits and nuts that are very sharp and vinegary. And that's where you're going to do the tibul of the moror into the charoses. And then they bring in ushnei tavshilin, 2 cooked foods. And now the Mishnah quotes a machlokas about tibul b'charoses. And first, we have the Tanakhama's view. Afal pisha ein b'charoses mitzvah. There's no mitzvah to eat charoses. Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Tzadok already disagrees. Mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to eat charoses, possibly even to make a bracha on charoses, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Tzadok. And finally, the Mishnah concludes, Ubemigdash, when the Migdash stood, they brought in front of him after he ate the yerek, gufo shel karban pesach. That's when they brought out the karban pesach. So that's the Mishnah here on Daf Kuf Yud Daled Amid Al.